The Wii is one of Nintendo's weirdest consoles, so it makes sense that its controllers are really strange too. The Wii Remote is nothing like any of the default controllers that Nintendo made before the Wii or after it, and that's saying something since this exists. The most immediately noticeable thing about the Wiimote is the way you hold it. As the name suggests, you hold it like a TV remote, which was likely intentionally done by Nintendo. The Wii was Nintendo's attempt at making a home console that was for everyone, not just kids and gamers. Nintendo had already succeeded at this in the handheld market prior to the Wii's release in 2006 with the Nintendo DS, which is why that console is currently, as of the time I'm writing this, Nintendo's best-selling game system of all time. And even before the DS was released in 2004, at the tail end of the 80s and in the 90s, the Game Boy had attracted a ton of non-gamers thanks to its library that included a number of games that had a broad appeal, like Pokemon with its abundance of quirky, lovable, and cool monster designs, and Tetris with its puzzle gameplay that was simple enough for anyone to understand. But handhelds are always gonna have more of a broader, more casual appeal because, well, they're handheld. They're literally easy to pick up and play. Making a home console that was as cozy and inviting as the DS was a difficult task, but Nintendo pulled it off thanks in large part to the Wiimote. The fact that the Wiimote is shaped like a TV remote makes it feel more natural, as TVs are ubiquitous in modern homes. Not only that, but the Wiimote's button layout is also designed in a similar way to TV remotes. A power button at the top, an OK button, which for the Wii is the A button, and directional controls in the upper half of the remote, and lesser used buttons for settings closer to the bottom. Nintendo added a trigger button on the bottom side of the Wiimote, which is a really nice touch. It gives the controller another means of input while also keeping the front of the remote very simple. Your index finger also naturally rests on the B button, which makes it really nice and comfortable as well. On the front of the Wiimote is a sensor that detects infrared light coming from the sensor bar that you place somewhere close to your TV. This allows you to point at the screen and have a cursor come up. This is a really underappreciated feature of the Wiimote. You don't have to go through menus with the D-pad or an analog stick. You can just point at whatever you want to do, which is another thing that makes the Wii such an intuitive console. One of my favorite lesser used features of the Wii is the speaker. Sometimes I forget this thing even exists, but yeah, there's just a speaker in here. In some games, by performing certain actions in game, you'll get a quick sound effect or a voice clip.
You can use the face recognition app on your smartphone to locate Sergeant Garcia.
It's not much, but it's quirky little things like this that make me love the Wiimote. Okay, I've talked a lot about the Wii Remote, but I've yet to talk about probably its most well-known feature, the motion controls. The Wiimote has an accelerometer inside of it, which allows it to detect the controller's accelerations in three-dimensional space. By swinging your arm IRL, your character would swing a tennis racket or a sword or a baseball bat in the game. The Wiimote isn't all that accurate, but it is versatile enough to give you a lot of different options for different types of games to play with it. You can aim at the screen for shooters, you can move it side to side for ping pong, and you can hold it sideways for games that involve steering. This is a video where I'll be going over different controllers for the Wii, but I would live in eternal shame if I did not mention an alternate control style of the Wii Remote, the sideways handlebar style. There actually were a number of games that allowed you to play with this method, like Donkey Kong Country Returns, Kirby's Return to Dreamland, and New Super Mario Bros. Wii. The Wiimote is really cool, but some games like 2D platformers, it just wouldn't work well for, so Nintendo gave you the option to hold the Wiimote sideways and use it that way, almost resembling an NES controller. Speaking of NES games, you could use the handlebar style to play those games on the Virtual Console. It actually feels pretty good to use. However, even Nintendo knew that the Wiimote on its own could only do so much, so they included an expansion port on the bottom of the Wiimote. This expansion port allows the Wii Remote to connect to other devices, the most famous of which being the Nunchuck, which was bundled alongside the Wiimote with the Wii console. The Nunchuck is this oddly shaped controller with an analog stick, a C button, and a Z trigger. It too has an accelerometer inside of it, so it has the capability for motion controls as well. The Nunchuck is really weird because it can't be used on its own. It needs to be connected to the Wii Remote like some sort of parasite. Like I said, the Wiimote on its own is noticeably limited since it has so few buttons. The home and power buttons are strictly used for opening up the home menu and turning off the system respectively, which means besides the D-pad, the Wiimote only has 6 buttons that it can use for gameplay. That's less than the Super Nintendo controller. And what makes it worse is that while holding the Wii Remote upright, you can't access the 1 and 2 buttons comfortably. You need to move your thumb all the way down there to reach those buttons, which isn't ideal for any sort of fast-paced game. Even the D-pad is troublesome because you can't use the D-pad and the A button at the same time without doing some thumb gymnastics. Luckily, with the nunchuck, you have 2 extra buttons and an analog stick, allowing for much more complex games. A lot of people talk about how great the GameCube controller feels, and it is great, but I think it's about time we gave the nunchuck some love because man, does this thing just melt into your hand. It's also super light, which just makes it so easy to hold. Typically, I do like a bit of weight to my controllers, but if you're playing a game that involves motion controls, having something that's lightweight is going to be way more comfortable for me in the long run. The nunchuck is a nice controller that is impossible not to mention when talking about Wii controllers. The nunchuck is only one of a few first-party controllers that connects to the Wiimote via the expansion port. Another one is the Classic controller. The Classic controller launched alongside the Wii, but it wasn't bundled with the system like the nunchuck was. Even though the nunchuck is cool, it still isn't suitable for more traditional games. So Nintendo made the Classic controller, a controller that is a whole lot more traditional. A D-pad, 2 analog sticks, 4 face buttons, and 4 shoulder buttons, 2 of which are analog buttons. While the Classic controller is a whole lot more standard, it also does some really strange things too, like how instead of having triggers, which had basically become the standard for video game controllers at that point, it opted for these little tiny shoulder buttons, ZL and ZR. I have no idea what they were thinking. These buttons are way too small and way too unnatural to press. You have to move your fingers quite a bit to reach them. Overall, this controller feels a bit too compact. My only other gripe with the controller is how Nintendo did the face buttons. Functionally, they work just fine, but my issue is how they made the symbols on the face buttons lowercase. Why are they lowercase? This is a mystery that's kept me up at night for years. Otherwise, it's a fine controller. The good thing is that being fine isn't good enough for Nintendo because in 2009, about 3 years after the Classic controller came out, Nintendo released an upgraded version of the Classic controller called the Classic Controller Pro. The Pro is just like the Classic controller, lowercase letters and all, except it's a lot less cramped. There are these grips that make it so much more comfortable to hold. The old Classic controller was just this rounded oval and your fingers are just kinda hanging off at the bottom of it. They changed the analog L and R buttons to regular digital buttons, but in return it has full-size ZL and ZR shoulder buttons, such as the law of equivalent exchange. The original Classic controller does have a bit of charm. And by charm, I mean for some reason Nintendo put the wire on the bottom of the controller instead of at the top like normal people, but if I had to pick one, I'd easily choose the Classic Controller Pro. The Classic controller wasn't the only Wii controller to get an upgrade though, because the same year that the Classic Controller Pro came out, the Classic Wiimote got the Wii Motion Plus. The Wii Motion Plus has gyroscope tech inside that allows for far more complex and ideally more accurate readings of the Wiimote's movements. I say ideally because while I do think that the Wii Motion Plus is generally pretty accurate, there are times when it just does whatever it wants. The Wii Motion Plus is just like this little brick that attaches onto your Wiimote via the expansion port. The Wii Motion Plus also has an expansion port of its own on the bottom of it, so you can still connect the nunchuck and the Classic controller to it, which is a nice touch. This makes the Wii Motion Plus seem less like an accessory, a separate controller, or an alternative, and more like a legitimate upgrade for the Wiimote. Later Wiimotes would come with the Wii Motion Plus built in, which supports this idea. However, unfortunately, the Wii Motion Plus would kind of end up being a cute little novelty as there weren't a ton of games that used it. Although I did get a lot of enjoyment out of this thing in Wii Sports Resort. Wii Sports Resort is basically a sequel to Wii Sports with more sports for you to play. And like Wii Sports came bundled with the Wii, this game came bundled with the Wii Motion Plus. I probably spent more time with the original Wii Sports, but Resort is definitely the better game with so many cool sports like basketball, archery, and sword fighting. Now, you're probably asking, hey, are you going to talk about the Wii Zapper, or the Wii Wheel, or the Wii Balance Board? No. But I will talk about the GameCube controller. This video is more about the first-party main controllers for the Wii. I could definitely do another video later about the weirder, more gimmicky Wii accessories. But yeah, the GameCube controller. I'm embarrassed to say that it took several years before I realized that the Wii had GameCube controller ports on it because they're hidden behind this little tab compartment thing. The console is backwards compatible with GameCube games, which is already amazing, but you can also use the GameCube controller for some Wii games, which is just icing on the cake. The GameCube controller is not as widely supported as the classic controller, but there are over 100 Wii games with GameCube controller compatibility, so you're bound to have at least one game in your collection that supports the controller. The number of different controller options for the Wii is something that I'm always impressed with when I look back on it. It may seem rather mundane, but your controller is how you interact with the game. It's how you connect with the game's world. So in a way, your controller is a reflection of yourself. And the fact that the Wii gives you so many options means you have so many different ways to express yourself. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed this little self-indulgent video about Wii controllers, and hopefully you'll be back when I talk about more Wii controllers next time.